Story 1. Counterintelligence Program. The Federal Bureau of Investigation actually ran a secret program to spy on and disrupt civil rights groups, anti-war activists, and other political organizations they did not like. This was not just passive surveillance. They actively tried to discredit people like Martin Luther King Jr. and infiltrate groups like the Black Panthers. It all came out in the 1970s when activists broke into a Federal Bureau of Investigation office and leaked the files. Story 2. I remember when the claim that wealthy individuals go to a remote island to harm children was considered a bizarre conspiracy theory. Now, everyone is waiting for the Jeffrey Epstein files to be released. Story 3. In 1990 South Korea, there was suspicion of foul play to prevent Kim Dae-jung from being elected president. He was a left-leaning politician who favored a more reconciliatory approach toward North Korea. South Korean leaders opposed this. Surprisingly, North Korean leaders did as well. To maintain their power, North Korea needed a South Korean enemy to oppose. Kim Dae-jung's friendlier stance threatened that. South Korean and North Korean officials conspired. They met secretly in China, where South Korea paid North Korea to create border disruptions whenever Kim Dae-jung gained popularity during election campaigns. This became so routine that South Koreans called it the North Wind. It was a conspiracy theory that North Korea sabotaged Kim Dae-jung's campaigns when he grew popular. Eventually, a South Korean spy exposed the scheme. He posed as a businessman interested in filming advertisements in North Korea and met North Korean officials in China. In reality, he worked for South Korean intelligence to gather proof and details of North Korea's nuclear program. During one stay in China, he stayed at the same hotel near officials involved in the scheme and confirmed its existence with his North Korean contacts. He collected enough evidence to threaten public exposure if the scheme continued. The operation ceased, and without the North Wind, Kim Dae-jung won the election. Kim Dae-jung became known as South Korea's greatest president and won the Nobel Peace Prize for his North Korea policy. This story was dramatized in the film The Spy Gone North. The spy's code name was Black Venus. None of this was publicly known until the 2000s and 2010s, when those involved were convicted. Story 4. Project Echelon. It was a conspiracy theory during the Clinton administration about the United States government monitoring domestic communication. We later found out it was true. Story 5. I do not know about a theory as much as a fact. Major League Baseball ignored the mass use of steroids in baseball, which peaked in the 1990s and early 2000s, because it was stimulating ticket sales following the players' strike in 1994, when public opinion and interest in baseball were dwindling. It gave them a quick rebound, and they only gave it attention when the health effects came to light and Congress got involved in the mid-2000s. Story 6. The National Security Agency mass surveillance program targeted United States citizens, allies' defense apparatus, and individual heads of friendly states. This was done while collaborating with major telecommunications companies to bulk gather data and pass it on to National Security Agency in-house tools. It is astonishing how easily all this was overlooked in the name of terrorism by passing the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act law that not only protected the National Security Agency but also telecommunications companies retroactively. Do people really understand the tools the National Security Agency has? They are both impressive and alarming. Research-tailored access operations. These individuals are renowned. Note: I have revised the content for clarity and appropriateness. Story 7. Tobacco companies knew about the dangers of smoking and withheld and falsified data for decades, probably condemning thousands of people to death from cancer and other smoking-related diseases. The Catholic Church covered up abuse by priests for decades. Story 8. The Martha Mitchell effect refers to a situation where a person's accurate perception of real events is mislabeled as delusional by medical professionals, leading to a misdiagnosis. It is named after Martha Mitchell, who was dismissed as mentally ill when she reported on illegal activities during the Watergate scandal, which were later confirmed to be true. Story 9. There are people in the conspiracy subreddits paid to run interference on legitimate conspiracy theories posted there by manipulating the posters and comments to make people who agree with the conspiracy look bad. Story 10. Before Snowden, we probably all assumed the government was spying on us, but to what extent was unknown. To think the answer was everyone, all the time, anytime was considered a conspiracy theory. Then Snowden revealed that they know just about anything they could ever want to know about everyone. Whatever you do digitally is completely at their disposal, as well as many things you do in the physical world. Workarounds like the onion router known as Tor just slow them down or deter them, but if they really wanted you in particular, they can get around that too. Story 11. There were rumors that the Federal Bureau of Investigation infiltrated civil rights and Black Power movements. It turns out not only was it true, but the rumors were spread by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to further disrupt those groups. Story 12. Big Tobacco lied about how harmful cigarettes were. I was only a child, but my parents talked about how something so incredibly popular, like cigarettes, suddenly became a cover-up for how terrible they are for you. My mom compared it to if it came out that milk is horrible for us and Big Dairy spent millions covering it up. Story 13. The Free Britney movement began online as a conspiracy theory that Britney Spears was being held against her will. There were posts with videos of bodyguards watching her every move. People started to march for her freedom. The issue ended up in court where it was proven to be true. She is now happily a free woman. Story 14. McDonald's vilified the older woman who was burned by their coffee by saying she was greedy and faking, when in reality they kept the coffee extra hot to stay fresh longer. She suffered third-degree burns that scarred her severely. She only asked for her medical and lawyer bills to be covered. Story 15. Apple's slowing down old phones to encourage more people to buy new models. Story 16. I remember back in 2017, I was serving a table and joking with the man about how my husband told me he wanted to go shopping for winter boots. Literally, as soon as I opened Facebook, every ad was for winter boots. The man was laughing, but the woman became very quiet and seemed upset. I took the hint and left quickly. As I was leaving, I overheard her say, "You don't really believe that, do you?" He replied, "What? That companies are listening to your voice to market things?" She said, "Yes. It upsets me so much when people talk about that because it's just not true, and that would be such an invasion of privacy." This woman was very angry. I have always wondered how she is doing in 2025, knowing that not only is it true, but it is also normalized and expected now. Many people have smart homes that know what they need for groceries before they do. Story 17. That time the United States military conducted secret chemical testing on unsuspecting residents of a predominantly Black and low-income housing complex in St. Louis. During the Cold War, the Pruitt-Igoe housing development was one of several sites across the United States chosen for testing where the Army would release particles of zinc-cadmium sulfide, prolonged or repeated exposure to which can cause cancer and damage to internal organs. The official purpose of these tests was to study how an aerosol agent might spread in various environments. St. Louis was selected due to its similarities to Moscow, including being a densely populated area with similar architectural characteristics in some areas and accessibility to a large river. The fact that the majority of residents subjected to these dispersion tests were Black was entirely unrelated. By the mid-1980s, the Central Intelligence Agency would be deliberately funneling crack cocaine into Black neighborhoods across the country. Story 18. Martha Mitchell told the truth about Nixon's Watergate break-in crime but was initially called crazy, a label applied by Nixon and her own husband John Mitchell, who was Nixon's attorney general, close friend, and co-conspirator. In the uptight mid-1960s, Martha often overshadowed John, being famous for her vocal honesty, unfiltered outspokenness, loudness, bluntness, sassy and funny quips, with a disarming Southern flamboyant style that was usually loved but sometimes hated by people with something bad to hide. Originally she supported Nixon and his campaign, but his actions repelled her to the point she openly criticized him, crossing a line Nixon couldn't accept. Nixon and Mitchell plotted to silence her when she talked about the Watergate Hotel break-in in her characteristically candid way, which was so shocking people initially didn't believe her, as Nixon was still believed and very popular. Nixon and Mitchell conspired together, had goons kidnap her, or rather broke into her room to keep her prisoner, slightly assaulted and drugged her, keeping her in a hotel room for a week around the time of the Watergate break-in. When they let her go, she was livid, and the louder she protested, the more they told the media she was hysterical. Nixon and Mitchell panicked, trying to quiet rumors and distract the press about Watergate, which worked for a while. She was marginalized and humiliated by Nixon and John, branded crazy, and her popularity waned. After a year or two, the press and a Nixon insider admitting the plot unraveled and exposed the Watergate scandal and related crimes, proving her initial claims were true. Nixon was forced to resign, and John Mitchell and others were arrested and jailed. Martha eventually got credit for exposing Nixon's plot and earned respect from many women who knew her plight in an era when abused women were belittled, treated like property, and expected to keep quiet no matter what. As the Watergate scandal, Nixon's crimes, and resignation demoralized the country, people were eager to move on. Martha, who faded from public view after John left her and filed for divorce, taking custody of their child Marty to punish Martha, enjoyed a brief national resurgence of popularity and social vindication. Not long after she developed multiple myeloma, a rare form of bone marrow cancer. Battling it left her alone and isolated until her untimely death within a year or so. The situation where one tells the truth, is branded as delusional but eventually is believed because they told the truth, was dubbed by a psychologist as the Martha Mitchell effect. There is a profoundly insightful documentary about it all. I urge everyone to watch if they can. It remains sadly relevant today as aspects feel timeless. It is very enlightening to see how politics really worked then and how even famous, influential women were so easily vilified, mentally and physically abused for telling the truth, and those who believed her were also mocked and branded crazy. This tactic is still used today. Story 19. I always think of the Catholic Church covering up priests who committed abuse when these sorts of questions are asked. People knew about such priests and were aware that they were dangerous. These priests were moved out of a parish when their behavior became known, without any recognition of the children who were affected. The whole issue was uncovered as part of the Spotlight investigation. It has expanded because this sort of thing was happening all over the world. Story 20. I think the theory that back in 1980, Iran agreed to hold on to the hostages until after the November presidential elections to make President Jimmy Carter look weak and boost Ronald Reagan's chances has been well substantiated. Somewhat relatedly, Oliver North and the Iran-Contra affair. During the administration of President George H.W. Bush, and with the apparent knowledge, if not direct involvement, of Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, North facilitated selling arms to Iran and funneling the profits to the Contra forces in Nicaragua. Story 21. Black helicopters. In the 1990s, these were the equivalent of tinfoil hats. Conspiracy theorists would talk endlessly about totally silent black helicopters, modified Black Hawks, that could move around at high altitudes almost undetected. The thing is, they were real the whole time. When the United States government sent in SEAL Team 6 to capture Osama bin Laden, they publicly announced that SEAL Team 6 dropped in on 2 silent black helicopters and had to destroy one to prevent the technology from being recovered. That is something they just said confidently, as if it was not a big deal. Maybe it isn't, but I just imagined a whole lot of conspiracy theorists celebrating because something they had been saying for 20 years was proven true. Story 22. Mountain Meadows Massacre. Joseph Smith's conviction for scrying with rocks, and his early conning of New Englanders for cash. His fleeing the jurisdiction after his Kirtland, Ohio money cons and escapades. Then his polygamy and shooting his way out of jail during his drunken, planned prison break. Denied, lied about, covered up. The whispers on the winds that anyone who believed in these conspiracies were Satan's minions. The pretense. The holy rituals devised to absolve those who participated of their sins. Blamed on persecution and meddling outsiders, called tall tales and malicious lies, when most whistleblowers were born in the covenant or were true Mormon converts themselves. All true, all factual, all proven, all documented, all corroborated, and later all admitted to by church authorities, after decades, or in several cases after a century, of punishing anyone who dared speak of them. It's not paranoid if they really are out to get you, and it's not slander if what you say is true. Story 23. The first communist government to come to power through voting in a democratic way was overthrown by the Central Intelligence Agency in 1959 in Kerala. Story 24. Lance Armstrong used performance-enhancing drugs. Many people had this conspiracy theory about him, and it was later confirmed that he did use drugs. Story 25. If it involved experimenting on or sterilizing indigenous, black, or disabled people, it is probably true. Story 26. People, mainly Chinese, went to Thailand and were kidnapped and disappeared. The government of Thailand denied it for a long time because powerful individuals within the government and military were involved. Fast forward a couple of years, it turned out to be true. People were kidnapped in Thailand and forced to work in scam call centers just across the border in Cambodia and Myanmar. Thousands of people are still trapped in such places. Story 27. There was a kid in school who told us his dad worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, doing mind control experiments using lysergic acid diethylamide on mental patients at the hospital in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. As if MKUltra was real, run by the Central Intelligence Agency, at mental hospitals in Canada, and they used megadoses of lysergic acid diethylamide. They admitted to a lot of things but never to the experiments in Moose Jaw. There is no way this kid could have known this information decades before it became public unless he was telling the truth. Story 28. The Titanic splitting in half before it sank. Although many survivors claimed it did, others said it did not. Cunard and nautical engineers denied it, indicating there was no way that could have happened. I have no idea why. What difference would it make? Yet, until Ballard found the wreck, there was a lot of denial and debate as to whether it went down in one piece. Story 29. This is not really a conspiracy theory, but in the late 1980s and early 1990s, mass hysteria was blamed for children telling therapists that they were being sexually assaulted. Later, the Catholic Church, Boy Scouts, and the Me Too movement brought forward adults who were victims as children, saying they were sexually assaulted and told to remain silent about it. Story 30. The United States government quietly admitted the Gulf of Tonkin incident was exaggerated and false. No one cared that the precipitating event of the Vietnam War was a lie. Story 31. Let's ask famed troublemaker Abbie Hoffman. He suffered from bipolar disorder type 1 with psychotic episodes and claimed there was systematic harassment and attempts to frame dangerous people by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Turns out he was right, and it was called Counterintelligence Program. It focused mostly on non-white people but also targeted individuals and groups it considered leftist. Story 32. The car industry sabotaged the public transportation industry. Story 33. The light bulb cartel. They were a group of light bulb manufacturers in the early 1900s that purposely designed light bulbs to fail after a while so people would keep buying more light bulbs. This included General Electric, Philips, and other big-name manufacturers. Story 34. Not much of a conspiracy, but oil and gas companies knew about the effects of their industry on our world many decades ago. Since then, they have spent these past few decades funding disinformation campaigns, buying politicians, and discrediting scientific research so their shareholders could get richer. Story 35. It turns out there is a group of wealthy individuals who traffic children and are harmful predators. Our current administration is covering for them. Story 36. Reading all these comments makes you realize that if the United States government can think it and it benefits them, they will do it. I am never dismissing a crazy conspiracy again, especially if it benefits the government. Story 37. President Richard Nixon was involved in covering up the participation of his re-election campaign in the break-in at the Watergate complex. Story 38. Modern art was a Central Intelligence Agency psychological operation. This was confirmed in 1995. This idea is often framed as modern art is terrible, so there must be some nefarious reason why it is popular. Money laundering is another common conspiracy theory explanation. Perhaps I have been influenced by propaganda, but I enjoy modern and contemporary art. The Central Intelligence Agency did not invent it, but they funded and promoted it to oppose traditional monarchist, fascist, and communist styles of art. Modern art was gaining popularity on its own merits and was simply supported by the Central Intelligence Agency. Considering the many atrocities the Central Intelligence Agency has committed over the years, promoting a new style of art is comparatively mild. The only person who went to prison related to the Bush-era Central Intelligence Agency torture program was the whistleblower who exposed it. Even if you dislike modern art, replacing traditional art with modern art is nowhere near as harmful as when they overthrew Iran's democracy and installed a puppet monarch so British Petroleum could continue to exploit their oil. Story 39. When Sinead O'Connor tore up the photo of the Pope on Saturday Night Live and faced all that hate, it turns out there was a reason she did it. Story 40. It seems like the Pizzagate conspiracy was incorrect, but not entirely false. It did not involve the Democratic Party, nor was it located in the basement of a pizza restaurant. However, there appears to have been a large pedophile ring involving members of the elite class. This ring operated on a private island. Story 41. The National Basketball Association being rigged for organized crime by the referees was a conspiracy theory throughout the 1990s, and then it turned out that it was definitely happening. Story 42. I used to think conservatives were strangely obsessed with pedophile deep state nonsense. They were correct. Story 43. Just scrolling down this thread, you can see how many people do not understand the meaning of conspiracy theory or proof. Story 44. Central Intelligence Agency involvement in government disruption when countries became tired of being exploited by United States companies. Story 45. I don't know if it was a theory, but it was most definitely a conspiracy. Johnson & Johnson knew their talcum powder contained asbestos. It is especially harmful to females because they make up the larger majority of users, outside of babies. It is only relatively recently that they were exposed. There is more to it. One of many potential links is below. Story 46. Big corporations are hiding harmful product information. Well, hello Big Tobacco, Volkswagen, Johnson & Johnson, just to name a few. Story 47. MK Ultra, Iran-Contra, COINTELPRO, and currently MAGA becoming the Nazi pedophile party. We are still waiting for the assassination of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and what happened to Tower 7. Also, does Ted Cruz eat babies? Story 48. The Federal Bureau of Investigation surveillance of John Lennon. He would talk about hearing voices on his phone being followed, and the media just dismissed it as a crazy drug-fueled hippie. However, it was actually something President Nixon got J. Edgar Hoover to do because they were afraid his Beatle power would be used to influence the elections against the Republicans. Story 49. The government was spying on people. Everyone laughed until Edward Snowden revealed evidence as if it were a major sales event. Story 50. The Earth is not the center of the universe. The Catholic Church suppressed Galileo because they felt threatened. House arrest until death, banned books, forced recanting, all enforced. Only after it was no longer possible to suppress the truth did they change their position on the subject. Story 51. Back in the mid-1990s, we all thought the government was reading our email and tracking our usage. The general public thought we were mistaken because the government would never do that. Then came Edward Snowden's revelations. Story 52. Operation Gladio was considered a completely absurd and impossible conspiracy theory in Europe for decades. It was uncovered in 1990 that it was, in fact, entirely true and even larger than expected. Story 53. COVID-19 originated in Wuhan, China. This fact is not a racist statement. To be clear, making jokes about the virus or its associated nicknames is not racist. Such jokes fall under dark humor, which varies according to individual taste. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.